Dr. McKenna attempted to establish a psychology clinic in the early 1950s, but had to be particularly careful about treading on the toes of the church and psychiatry. His hope was that if they introduced psychology through a child and family model and through an already established church organization, it would be more acceptable to the public. The Order of St. John of God was one of the main church-run voluntary organizations serving people with mental health difficulties, so they were invited to start the first psychological services to the Irish public. The Child Guidance Clinic in Rathgar, Dublin, opened its doors in 1955, and Dr. McKenna was the first clinical psychologist practicing in Ireland. It did take a while for psychological services to expand, however. Ireland was still poor in the 1950s and 1960s, and the uptake of psychological services was rather slow. Nearly all psychologists who were trained between 1955 and 1965 were trained in Dr. McKenna's clinic. Shortly after psychological services began being offered, the first Irish degree program in psychology began in 1958. Monsignor Eamon O'Doherty held the chair of logic and psychology at UCD, and although he was a priest, he also completed a PhD in experimental psychology at the University of Cambridge. His hope was for psychology and the church to work together, as they had some overlap in their roles, such as counseling. He also recognized that because psychological services were being established in Ireland, there would be a need for trained psychologists, and thus a need for psychology training programs. Thus, Father O'Doherty began his mission to establish a psychology course at University College Dublin. His quest was met with opposition, but he eventually received a grant to start the course. The result was a 2-year diploma in psychology, today called the Higher Diploma. This program was available to graduates of other programs who were interested in re-specializing in psychology, keeping a more applied focus. Shortly thereafter, in 1964, Trinity College established a BA degree in psychology. Because of a bitter rivalry between the Protestant Trinity and the Catholic UCD, UCD then established a BA in 1967. Psychology degree programs were established at University College Cork in 1964 and University College Galway in 1971. In a span of about 20 years, psychology had grown immensely. By the late 1960s, many psychology graduates began filling positions in educational and health services. Because psychology as a profession was so new to Ireland, the task of organizing a professional service and defining professional roles was a daunting one. In December 1968, James McCloone, Creona Garvey, and Therese Brady all met to discuss establishing an Irish Psychological Society. They discussed the project with nearly all of the psychologists in the country in 1969, which came to 70 participants. While there was unanimous support that a society was needed, it was difficult to come to a consensus on the qualifications required to be a psychologist. The working group deliberated for about a year, as it was important to get unanimous support from all members. It was decided that this new professional body would be called the Psychological Society of Ireland, PSI, and its Irish language name would be Cumann Síceolaithe Éireann. After 5 meetings, they had a draft of a constitution. Finally, in 1970, the Psychological Society of Ireland was established at a meeting attended by 96 psychologists and chaired by James McCloone. The Constitution was approved unanimously, and James McCloone was elected president, Therese Brady was elected secretary, and Creona Garvey was elected treasurer. Everyone was delighted, and they celebrated with wine and cheese at Trinity College. PSI was then recognized by the International Union of Psychological Science in 1974. Today, psychology is flourishing in Ireland. Despite a late start, it grew immensely in the second half of the 20th century. From 1955 to 1974, it went from a country with no psychological services whatsoever and no psychology programs at universities to one on par with other countries with longer psychological histories. Psychology is one of the most popular bachelor's degree programs in Ireland, and there are doctoral programs in clinical psychology, counseling psychology, and psychological research. St. John of God still provides mental health services and employs many psychologists, and many more clinics have been established throughout the country. Ireland still has a long way to go, as there is still no formal licensure process, and there are few psychologists with specialties such as dialectical behavioral therapy. But Irish psychology has truly come a long way in the past 65 years, and the current psychological research at Irish universities is world-renowned. When Irish psychologists refer to the founding fathers of psychology, it is often accompanied by a wry smile to reflect the fact that they were fathers in more ways than one.
created using Powtoon.